What happens when a stormy night brings out long-hidden secrets? Find out in the 13 Problems. A fierce storm rages outside, its howling wind sweeping across the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead. The soft glow of the fire flickers and dances in the cozy drawing room of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting long shadows on the walls. The crackling of the logs in the hearth provides a warm contrast to the fury of nature just beyond the windows. Inside, a small group of friends have gathered around, each clutching a cup of tea, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They are a mix of ages, from the charmingly aloof Miss Alford to the brooding, middle-aged Mr. Howard. There's an air of familiarity, but also something unspoken and underlying tension, as if they've all come together with a shared understanding that something is about to unfold. Miss Marple, seated in her favorite armchair, surveys the group with a gentle smile, though her eyes are sharp and observing. She is a woman of many years, but there's a quiet depth to her wisdom that only time and a lifetime of secrets could provide. She is always the observer, the listener, but never the one to let a thing pass unnoticed. The wind outside begins to howl louder, and the old grandfather clock chimes midnight. Its echo reverberates throughout the room, and suddenly the silence feels heavy. The group exchanges uncertain glances. It's almost as if the clock's toll marks the beginning of something far more ominous. Perhaps we should share a story, Miss Alford suggests, her voice barely audible over the storm. A tale from the past, something to warm our spirits. One by one, the others nod, their faces lighting up with a flicker of excitement, or is it nervousness? Each person, it seems, has a secret tale to tell, but Miss Marple knows better than to let the masks of normalcy fool her. "I'll start," Mr. Howard says, his voice unusually shaky. His hands tremble slightly as he raises his teacup to his lips, but his gaze is fixed, as though recalling something both familiar and unsettling. "I once had a friend, or rather an acquaintance, a man who vanished without a trace. His disappearance was shrouded in mystery, but no one could ever explain why. There were rumors, whispers of a stolen jewel, of a ruined reputation, and a 13th guest, someone who was never seen, but whose presence was felt that night." The others listen intently, their interest piqued. Miss Marple's lips curl into the faintest of smiles. She already knows something they don't. Her eyes, usually soft, are now piercing, as if she's weighing the truth in Mr. Howard's words. She leans forward, and the firelight catches her face in an eerie way, making her appear almost spectral. "Are you certain," she asks in a voice as calm as a summer breeze, "that everyone who was supposed to be there actually came?" Her words hang in the air like a question no one had dared to ask before. The room seems to grow colder, the flickering firelight casting strange, moving shadows. The others exchange glances, their faces now tight with something more than curiosity. There is doubt, yes, but something else too. A creeping sense of unease. Had they all truly known everything about that fateful night? The lights flicker, casting the room into momentary darkness. In the brief, sharp silence, there is the unmistakable sound of something heavy shifting in the shadows, a creak from the floorboards. Or was it the wind? Mr. Howard's hand trembles again, his grip on his teacup tightening. "Secrets," Miss Marple says softly, her eyes scanning the group, "have a way of demanding answers when you least expect them." Her voice is laced with a knowing that chills the room even more than the storm outside. The temperature drops, and everyone's breath becomes visible in the dim light. The tension is thick. Something is on the verge of unraveling, something none of them are prepared for. Then, another crack of thunder shakes the house. The wind is deafening, as if urging them all to listen, to acknowledge the secrets that have been buried too long. Mr. Howard, now visibly pale, grips his teacup so hard his knuckles whiten. His eyes dart nervously around the room, as if searching for a way to escape, or perhaps hoping the room itself will reveal its hidden truths. Miss Marple, however, remains calm, poised as ever, as if she already knows what will happen next. And in that pregnant moment of silence, the power goes out, plunging the room into darkness. The only sounds are the crackling fire, the storm outside, and the rapid beating of everyone's hearts. Cliffhanger ending. Then Miss Marple's voice cuts through the stillness, a final haunting whisper. I wonder how long will it take before the truth demands to be heard. The mystery begins. The storm outside has only grown fiercer, rattling the windows as Mr. Howard, still visibly unsettled, leans forward in his chair. The room is dim, save for the flickering glow from the fire. His fingers tremble slightly as he stirs his tea, the sound of the spoon clinking against the porcelain almost too loud in the tense silence. The others in the room are watching him intently, their faces a mixture of curiosity and subtle unease. Let me tell you a story, Mr. Howard begins, his voice low and hesitant. It's one of those cases that never quite leaves you. A strange case involving a missing jewel, a ruined reputation, and, he pauses, his throat tight, as if even speaking the words brings a chill. A 13th guest who was never supposed to be there. Miss Marple leans back in her chair, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, the firelight casting shadows across her features. Her expression remains unreadable, but there is a spark of something curiosity perhaps, or is it something deeper? I was invited to this gathering once. Mr. Howard continues, his voice trembling now. A lavish affair, rich people, high society people you'd never expect to be involved in anything untoward. But one night, during the height of the festivities, a jewel was stolen right under our noses. A priceless heirloom, gone. But it wasn't just the jewel that was lost. A man's reputation, a lifelong family name, it was all ruined in the blink of an eye. The scandal tore through the town. He falls silent for a moment, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the flickering flames. His breath hitches, as though the memories are threatening to choke him. There was talk of a 13th guest, someone who had arrived uninvited, someone whose presence was never acknowledged, yet whose shadow seemed to lurk over everything. The room is still, except for the sound of the storm pounding against the cottage. The guests exchange uneasy glances, their minds racing. Who was this mysterious guest? And why had they never been discovered? Miss Marple's eyes glint with a sharpness that's almost unsettling. She watches Mr. Howard closely, her lips pressed together in thought. Then, without warning, she speaks in a tone so calm, so precise, it sends a chill through the room. Are you sure, she asks, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife, that everyone who was supposed to be there actually came? Her question hangs in the air, unnerving the guests. Their faces shift, eyes widening ever so slightly. It's as if something long buried has just been unearthed. But what? A ripple of realization begins to sweep through the room. The 13th guest, was it someone everyone knew? Or was it an intruder, someone who had slipped through unnoticed, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake? A thick tension builds as the group looks around the room, all of them aware of the implications. The unspoken question lingers. Could this theft, this scandal, have been something more? A setup, an inside job. One by one, the guests start to speak, their voices trembling. But we were all there. One says, everyone we invited. Another adds, we'd all seen the guest list. There couldn't have been anyone else. And yet, as they speak, a creeping doubt begins to cloud their minds. What if they were wrong? What if the thief had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, pulling the strings without anyone realizing? Miss Marple watches the group carefully, her expression still calm, but there's an unmistakable tension in the way she regards each one of them. Slowly she stands and walks over to the window, looking out into the storm. The shadows from the fire dance across her face as she turns back to the room, her eyes colder now. I have seen many things, she says quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But one thing I know for certain, the truth often hides behind the most innocent of faces. The room falls into dead silence. The words sink in, the weight of them settling heavily on everyone's shoulders. Could the person sitting next to them, sharing tea and nervously tapping their fingers, be the very one they've been searching for? Could the real crime through betrayal have been right under their noses all this time? The storm outside grows louder, thunder crashing so violently that the windows shake. And as if to add to the mounting tension, there is a faint, almost imperceptible sound like a door creaking, followed by the sound of footsteps. The group stiffens, eyes darting toward the doorway. Miss Marple, without even flinching, turns toward the group. Her lips curl into a faint smile almost, a knowing smile, but one that sends a chill down everyone's spine. "Perhaps," she says softly, "the answer is closer than you think." Into a faint smile almost, a knowing smile, but one that sends a chill down everyone's spine. "Perhaps," she says softly, "the answer is closer than you think." Cliffhanger ending. As the last words linger in the air, the storm outside reaches a deafening crescendo. There is a moment of stillness before the unmistakable sound of a footstep echoes in the hallway outside the room. A shadow moves quickly across the threshold, too quick to be anyone inside. The tension in the room is unbearable, and for the first time, everyone is afraid to breathe. What happens next? The investigation surprised. The atmosphere in the room has thickened, the tension almost suffocating, as Miss Marple calmly surveys her guests. Her eyes, sharp as ever, flick from face to face, taking in every tiny movement, every telltale sign. The fire has burned lower, casting long shadows that dance across the walls, creating an eerie atmosphere that seems to hold its breath. No one speaks. The silence is deafening. The only sound is the rain lashing against the windows and the occasional creak of the old house settling. After a long, pregnant pause, Miss Marple finally speaks. Her voice is quiet, but her words cut through the air like a knife. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we?" she says, looking at each guest in turn. "Tell me what you remember about that night. All of it. The smallest detail may be the one that unravels everything." She doesn't need to say another word. One by one, her guests begin to recount their version of events, their voices uneasy, their hands trembling. Each story is filled with gaps, contradictions, and a sense of discomfort that only deepens the mystery. Mr. Howard speaks first, though his voice shakes. "I remember the jewel glinting in the light, so beautiful. I saw it for only a moment, and then it was gone." He fidgets nervously with his teacup, avoiding eye contact. His story, though seemingly simple, is strangely evasive, as if he's hiding something. Miss Marple, her expression unreadable, asks no questions yet, only listening closely, her fingers lightly drumming on the arm of her chair. She knows that everyone's words are like puzzle pieces, but some pieces are clearly missing. The others share their stories, each one adding to the confusion. Hina, the quietest of the group, nervously brushes a lock of hair behind her ear as she speaks. "I remember a soft thud, as if something heavy had fallen. But when I looked around, nothing seemed out of place." Her voice trails off, and she quickly looks down, as if afraid of what she might have seen or didn't see. It's then that Miss Marple's gaze sharpens. There's something in the way the stories are told, a pattern forming that no one else seems to notice. "I see," she murmurs softly. "Inconsistencies. Tiny ones, but ones that cannot be ignored." The others fall silent, their gazes flicking nervously from one another to Miss Marple. The air grows even colder, a subtle chill creeping over the room. "I'll begin with the first clue," Miss Marple announces, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. She picks up a small, fragile item from the coffee table's shattered teacup. The porcelain is chipped, the delicate pattern barely visible through the cracks. "This was found near the garden, wasn't it?" Mrs. Hargrave nods slowly, her eyes wary. "Yes, it was. We all assumed it was just an accident. One of us must have knocked it over." Miss Marple holds the teacup in her hand, her fingers gently tracing the shards. "But if it was an accident," she continues, "then why was it found outside, so far from the table? And why did it seem so deliberate, as though it had been carefully placed there?" The room is silent, the guests exchanging uncertain glances, unable to provide an answer. "And now this," Miss Marple says, pulling out a small torn piece of fabric from her pocket. She holds it up, revealing an embroidered letter M, its delicate stitching hidden within the tear. The fabric is elegant, fine material. It doesn't belong to any of the guests, and yet, it's unmistakably familiar. The guests exchange nervous looks, each of them wondering whose clothing it could have come from. Mrs. Hargrave is the first to speak. "That fabric, it looks familiar, but I can't place it." Miss Marple's eyes glitter with quiet knowing. Perhaps it belongs to someone who was closer than they realized. A guest who was never invited, but perhaps had every reason to be there. She pauses for a moment, letting the words sink in. It seems then that our mystery guest wasn't so much a stranger after all. A low murmur rises among the guests. Could it be true? Had someone been hiding in plain sight, quietly pulling the strings? Was the 13th guest somehow tied to all of this? "There's more," Miss Marple continues, her tone unchanging. "A whispered scandal. Forbidden love, was it? Between two of you, perhaps. Love that should never have been allowed to bloom, yet did, in the shadows, hidden from the rest of the world." The guests shift uncomfortably. The room seems to grow colder with each word. "Who was it?" Miss Marple asks, her voice sharp now, her gaze scanning the faces around her. "Who among you had something to hide? And how does it tie into the missing jewel, the ruined reputation, the accusations?" Each guest avoids her eyes, their faces turning pale as they realize the depth of the web Miss Marple is weaving. It's clear now this wasn't a simple theft. There was something much darker at play. As the investigation continues, Miss Marple's connections become clearer. The threads she's pulling at me, seemingly insignificant clues are beginning to form a picture. And with each new revelation, the atmosphere grows more suffocating. Then, as the tension peaks, Miss Marple stands up, her eyes never leaving the guests. She walks slowly to the window and peers outside into the night, her reflection flickering in the glass. "There's one last clue," she says, her voice soft, but carrying an unsettling finality. "But it's not here, it's out there, waiting." Everyone holds their breath as Miss Marple turns back to the group. Her voice drops to a whisper. "There's someone among you who isn't telling the truth." A cold, heavy silence falls. The storm rages outside, but inside the room, it's as though the world has stopped spinning. The realization sets in. Someone in this very room is the killer. Cliffhanger ending. Miss Marple's eyes flicker to the doorway, a faint sound echoing from the hall outside, a soft, almost inaudible shuffle. The group stiffens. Everyone holds their breath, wondering if the murderer is about to reveal themselves or if the storm has brought someone else back. And then, as the sound grows louder, the door creaks open slowly, revealing a shadow in the doorway. Is it someone from the past? Or is it the person who has been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike? The answer will be revealed in the next moment. But will it be too late? The first twist. The room, once tense, now feels unbearable. The storm outside rages as the fire sputters low in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls. Each guest is still, trapped in their own thoughts, fear simmering beneath the surface. And yet, it's the silence that hangs in the air most painfully. No one dares speak, as if waiting for the storm's rage to mirror the chaos within. Miss Marple's sharp eyes move from one guest to the next. She hasn't spoken for several minutes, but in that silence, her presence is more commanding than any spoken word. Everyone is afraid of her knowing. They are afraid of what might slip through their lips under the weight of her gaze. Mrs. Hargrave shifts uncomfortably in her chair. Her eyes are focused on Mr. Howard, but there's something in her stare, a quiet fury. Her fingers clutch the edge of her teacup, so tightly her knuckles turn white. "You know what I think, Mr. Howard." Mrs. Hargrave's voice breaks the silence, sharp and accusing. "You're hiding something. Something more than just a missing jewel, something you've kept buried for far too long." The others freeze. The air seems to thicken with tension. Miss Marple's eyes narrow. Mrs. Hargrave's accusation is like a spark in dry kindling. Mr. Howard's face pales, his earlier composure cracking like porcelain under pressure. He opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. His hand trembles as he reaches for his teacup, only to knock it over in his haste. The room flinches collectively as the teacup crashes to the floor, spilling its contents across the rug. He stammers, "What do you mean? Two haven't." But Mrs. Hargrave, her voice now cold and unwavering, interrupts him. Don't play coy, Howard. The jewel, yes, it was stolen, but it wasn't just a random theft, was it? You were trying to cover something up, something far darker than any of us could have imagined. Her words echo through the room like thunder. All eyes turn to Mr. Howard. The revelation hangs in the air, heavy and suffocating. The theft, a mere smokescreen. But what was it hiding? Miss Marple remains silent, but her lips curl ever so slightly into a knowing smile. She knows something the others don't. The tiniest shift in her demeanor gives her away. Secrets have a way of unraveling themselves, don't they? She says softly, as though she's talking to herself, but her words hit like a guillotine. Every person in the room now feels the weight of those words. The truth is out there, and it's closer than any of them realize. As Miss Marple continues to watch Mr. Howard, the storm outside grows louder, more violent. The wind howls, rattling the windows. The rain strikes against the walls like 1,000 hammers. The atmosphere inside seems to press down on the group, squeezing them into a corner. Mr. Howard opens his mouth again, his voice cracking as he tries to form words. I didn't mean to. But Mrs. Hargrave interrupts again, her voice now a razor-sharp whisper. You didn't mean to do what? Steal the jewel? No, Mr. Howard, you meant to do far worse. Miss Marple finally rises from her chair, moving to stand in front of the fire, her back to the others. The crackling firelight reflects off her glasses, making her eyes seem even more calculating. She speaks slowly, deliberately, each word laced with hidden meaning. The jewel was never the true objective, she says softly, as if letting the room catch up with her. The jewel, the theft, the ruined reputational of it was simply the prelude, a diversion. To hide something far more sinister. She turns, her gaze piercing through the room, her voice now rising with quiet intensity. This was never about a jewel, Mrs. Hargrave. It was always about a murder. The room goes still. Time seems to stretch on, as if the very air has frozen in place. The weight of Miss Marple's words sinks in, and the full horror of the situation becomes clear. The jewel wasn't stolen for its value. It was stolen to cover up a much more terrible crime, murder. The others gasp, their faces a mixture of disbelief and growing dread. Mrs. Hargrave's face remains expressionless, but her hands shake as she stands abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You think someone was murdered? She whispers, the question hanging in the air. The room holds its collective breath. Miss Marple steps closer to the table, a glint in her eye. I'm not guessing, Mrs. Hargrave. I know. She places a single piece of paper on the table, an old yellowed letter. The others lean forward, eyes wide. This, Miss Marple continues, her voice lowering to a near whisper, is the letter of someone who witnessed a death, and not just any death. This is a letter from someone who saw a life taken, and saw it all tied to this very house. The room is silent, save for the sound of the fire crackling. Mr. Howard's face drains of color. His eyes flick to the letter, then back to the group, terror overtaking his features. He knows what Miss Marple has uncovered. And then, just as the tension reaches its peak, a sudden noise interrupts a loud, unexpected thud from somewhere deeper within the house. The door to the study, which had been locked, creaks open slowly by itself. Everyone's head snaps toward it. Did someone? Mrs. Hargrave stammers. Miss Marple raises a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. The storm howls louder outside, the wind almost deafening now. The door swings open wider, revealing nothing but darkness beyond it. And yet, the unsettling feeling of being watched hangs in the air. Someone or something was in that room, and it's not finished yet. Cliffhanger ending. Miss Marple steps toward the open door. She pauses for a heartbeat, and then turns slowly to face the room. Now, the question remains, she says, her voice barely a whisper. Who among us is hiding more than just a jewel? With that, she steps into the darkened room beyond, and the door creaks shut behind her, leaving the others alone in the dimly lit drawing room. A shadow moves across the doorway. Rising tension. The air in the room grows heavier with every passing second, thick with suspicion and fear. The fire sputters and cracks, its warm glow unable to combat the chill that has settled into the bones of the guests. The storm outside continues its violent tantrum, but inside the drawing room, a far more dangerous storm is brewing. The soft ticking of the old clock on the wall is the only sound, its measured rhythm seeming to count down the moments until something or someone breaks. Miss Marple stands in the center of the room, her sharp eyes scanning each guest as though she can see through them. Every movement, every shift of the eyes is noted, stored away in her sharp mind. She's always a step ahead, methodically picking apart each clue, each word, each nervous glance. As the group watches her, unease slowly builds. They are no longer simply guests in a drawing room. They are suspects, and each of them feels the weight of that fact bearing down on them. "Miss Marple, don't you think you've questioned us long enough?" Mr. Howard asks, his voice shaky but defiant, trying to regain some control. But his words only seem to deepen the silence. "I'm merely gathering the facts," Miss Marple replies coolly, her voice as steady as ever, though her words carry the sharpness of a blade being drawn from its sheath. She turns her attention to Mrs. Hargrave, her gaze piercing. "Tell me, Mrs. Hargrave, how long have you known about the secret between you and Mr. Howard?" The room freezes. Mrs. Hargrave's face drains of color. She opens her mouth to speak, but no words come. Her hands tremble slightly as she clutches her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her eyes darting nervously between the group. She's been caught, but she doesn't know how. She wasn't prepared for Miss Marple to see through her like this. Miss Marple doesn't wait for an answer. "You two have been hiding more than just a jewel," she continues, her voice low but laced with a quiet certainty. "And I'm starting to wonder if you weren't the only ones in on it." A gasp escapes from the other guests. Their eyes flick to Mr. Howard and Mrs. Hargrave, both of whom are now standing rigid, their faces betraying the slightest hints of guilt. Miss Marple's words hang in the air like a smothering blanket. What exactly are they hiding? "The truth has a way of emerging, eventually," Miss Marple murmurs, her eyes moving to the others. "Sometimes it arrives in the most unexpected places." The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. Every second feels drawn out, as though the room itself is holding its breath. But just as the guests begin to squirm under the mounting pressure, a new sound pierces the silence, the soft scrape of a chair moving. It's Mrs. Greaves, an older, dignified woman who has been unusually quiet throughout the evening. She stands, her eyes locked on the door, her body rigid with intent. "I've had enough of this," she snaps, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "This is madness. You're all mad." She takes a step toward the door, but before she can reach it, Miss Marple's voice rings out, calm and unwavering. "Running won't change the truth, dear." Mrs. Greaves falters, her hand resting on the doorknob, as though she's been struck. The weight of Miss Marple's words settles on her, heavy and inescapable. She doesn't move. She can't. Miss Marple steps closer, her sharp eyes never leaving Mrs. Greaves. "You can try to leave, but you can't escape the consequences of your actions. None of you can." The room grows colder, the temperature dropping as if the storm outside has moved in. The guests exchange uneasy glances, suddenly aware of what they've known all along but never allowed themselves to admit. The murderer is in the room. One of them is a killer, and they've been sitting among each other this entire time. The atmosphere shifts. It's not just fear anymore. It's paranoia. The walls seem to close in on them. Miss Marple, who has been the epitome of calm throughout, now carries the weight of impending doom. Her every word is an invitation to the truth that no one wants to hear. The guests no longer speak. They only look at each other, calculating, wondering. Who among them is capable of murder? And what secret, what betrayal, lies at the heart of it all? In a sudden motion, Mr. Howard stumbles forward, his face contorted with panic. I can't do this anymore," he shouts. His voice cracks, his composure breaking as he grabs at his collar, as though he can't breathe. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But Miss Marple's gaze cuts him off, her expression unreadable, almost too knowing. "It's too late for regrets, Mr. Howard. The truth has already begun to unravel, and once it starts, there's no stopping it. The storm outside reaches a fever pitch, its howl rising to a deafening crescendo. The wind rattles the windows, shaking the entire house, as if nature itself is urging the truth to come to light. The guests recoil at the sound, but Miss Marple stands unflinching, her eyes locked on them all. And then, a soft noise comes from the hallway, a light shuffle of footsteps, quick and deliberate. Someone is moving through the house. Someone is coming. The guests turn toward the sound, their eyes wide with fear. "Who's there?" Mrs. Hargrave whispers, her voice barely audible. But Miss Marple doesn't answer. She simply watches, her expression unreadable. She already knows. The door creaks open slowly, and the figure that steps into the room is barely visible in the dim light. A shadow unnamed, unknown. Cliffhanger ending. The figure steps forward, and a single word escapes their lips, barely above a whisper. "It's time." The guests stare, eyes wide with shock, the truth finally dawning on them. But before anyone can react, the figure vanishes into the shadows once more. And the storm rages on. The final twist and climax. The atmosphere in the room is suffocating, as the storm outside continues to rage with a fury unmatched. The wind howls through the cracks in the windows, and the room feels smaller, colder, in oppressive silence descending as the group of guests sits, taut with anticipation. They know something is coming. They can feel it in the air. The final moment is at hand. Miss Marple, standing by the hearth, holds the room with her presence. Her usual calm demeanor has now taken on a chilling precision, as though she is both a spectator and a judge of the proceedings. Her fingers lightly tap the edge of her teacup, a gesture that, in the stillness of the room, feels like a countdown. The guests, once so sure of their innocence, are now on the edge of their seats, their faces etched with dread. She surveys the group one last time, her eyes moving over them with the quiet grace of a predator. Each of them is a suspect, every face hiding some secret. But there is something different now. The pieces are all on the table, and Miss Marple is the only one who has the full picture. With a sharp breath, Miss Marple begins to speak. "It all began with the 13th guest," she says, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of excitement. "A name forgotten by most, buried by time and fear. But that guest, the one no one truly believed existed, was the key to the puzzle." A hushed murmur ripples through the room. The guests exchange nervous glances. No one had ever spoken of the 13th guest in earnest, dismissing them as nothing more than an old, half-forgotten memory. Yet now, with Miss Marple's words, a horrifying truth begins to take shape. "It wasn't a figment of imagination," she continues, "nor a mistake of memory. The 13th guest was real." She pauses for effect, her eyes flicking across the room, watching their every reaction. "And that guest has returned, not for a mere treasure, not for a jewel, but for something far darker. Revenge." A gasp escapes from Mrs. Hargrave, who pales, her fingers trembling on the armrest of her chair. No, that can't be right." Miss Marple doesn't look at her. Her gaze is fixed, piercing through the very heart of the group. "Revenge," she repeats, her voice low and deliberate. "For a crime long buried. A murder that no one knew was a murder. Until now." The air crackles with tension. The storm outside intensifies, as though nature itself is reacting to the revelation. Miss Marple takes a few slow steps forward, drawing them all into the web she's woven. "The 13th guest," she goes on, "was a person who had been wronged by one in this very room. Someone who had disappeared years ago, presumed dead, but now we know the truth." The guests sit frozen, not daring to speak, their hearts racing. The tension is palpable, thick enough to choke on. "Everything was carefully orchestrated," Miss Marple continues. "The jewel theft was nothing but a cover for a far more sinister plot, a murder, carefully staged and hidden under layers of deceit." She pauses again, letting the silence stretch long, until it becomes unbearable. "And the real killer is someone who has been hiding in plain sight. The person no one suspected. The one who, until now, seemed harmless. Her eyes turned slowly toward the last person. No one had looked at Mr. Howard. The most unlikely of all. "Mr. Howard," Miss Marple says softly, her voice carrying a weight of certainty. "You thought no one would ever find out. But the truth always finds its way, doesn't it?" The room falls deathly silent. Mr. Howard, who had been so sure of his safety, now looks like a man who has just been sentenced. His face contorts with disbelief, shock evident in his eyes. "You're wrong," he shouts, his voice breaking. "I didn't—" But Miss Marple raises a hand, silencing him. Her expression is calm, unshaken, but there's an unmistakable glint of triumph in her eyes. "The 13th guest," she says again, her words echoing in the room, "was none other than your former partner, your co-conspirator, the one you betrayed, and that betrayal cost them their life." Mr. Howard stumbles back, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. His lips tremble as he attempts to deny it. "No, it wasn't me. I didn't do anything." But Miss Marple's unwavering gaze cuts through his defenses like a hot knife through butter. "The truth has been in front of us all along. The small inconsistencies, the missing fabric, the shattered teacup, the strange behavior of Mrs. Hargrave, the whispered accusations, all leading back to you." A deep, suffocating silence fills the room. For the first time, the guests are not just afraid of what Miss Marple knows, but of what they themselves have been complicit in. With a final, almost mournful sigh, Miss Marple steps back, and in the ensuing silence, it's clear the murder has been solved. The truth, however, is not as simple as they expected. There's something more, something darker still. Suddenly, the lights flicker and go out. The room plunges into darkness. "Miss Marple, what happens now?" one of the guests stammers, their voice trembling. There's a long pause, a breath held in the dark. And then, Miss Marple's voice calm, unruffled, but with a finality to it pierces the darkness. "Now, the real game begins." Cliffhanger ending. A faint sound echoes in the distance, a door creaking open, the soft rustle of footsteps approaching. But before anyone can move, the sound stops. All that's left is a shadow, lingering in the doorway. A figure, unseen, unheard. Then, the sound of a gunshot. And silence. Resolution. The room remains heavy with the weight of revelation, the once warm glow of the fire now reduced to a flickering, almost ghostly light. The storm outside, which had raged with such fury, has finally passed. The sky, though still dark, carries no more sound of thunder or rain. It's a deceptive calm, a silence that feels unnatural, as if the world is holding its breath, waiting. The group sits in stunned silence, each person lost in their own thoughts, their minds racing to process everything that's unfolded. The air feels thick, as if the very atmosphere is charged with the electric residue of the night's terrifying truths. The tension lingers, but now there's a sense of finality, as if the threads of the mystery have all been pulled taut, the knot tied tight. Yet, as the moments stretch on, a different emotion stirs in the Roumanies, perhaps even regret, mixed with an undeniable curiosity. They have all learned something tonight, not just about the murder, but about themselves and each other. Secrets have been unearthed, alliances shattered, and lives irreparably changed. Miss Marple, sitting in her usual armchair by the fireplace, is the only one who appears entirely unfazed. Her expression is calm, her hand steady as she takes another sip of her tea, her movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring a moment of peace amidst the chaos she's just created. "People may lie," she remarks, her voice a quiet murmur that seems to resonate in the otherwise silent room. "But human nature never does." She looks at each of them in turn, her eyes sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Her words seem to echo in the stillness, a reminder that no matter how much they try to bury the truth, it will always surface. It always does. Each person shifts uncomfortably in their chair, suddenly aware of the truth in those words and the weight of their own hidden natures. The murderer has been revealed, but the cost of uncovering the truth has left scars in the guests, on Miss Marple, and perhaps even on the very house itself. The storm has passed, but the quiet that remains feels more ominous than the tempest ever did. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, its warmth no longer a comfort but a reminder of what transpired. The group is still, their gazes locked on Miss Marple, almost waiting for her to speak again, to break the silence that is now suffocating them. As they rise to leave, the air still thick with unresolved tension, Miss Marple gives them one final, almost imperceptible smile. Her eyes glint with a secretone that none of them can quite decipher. It's a smile that holds a world of understanding, as if she knows more than she's letting on. "I wonder," she says, her voice soft but laced with an unsettling curiosity, "what other stories you all are hiding?" The words hang in the air, leaving a chill in their wake. The guests freeze. It's as if a door has opened, one they hadn't realized was there, leading to a new labyrinth of mysteries, secrets, and lies they haven't even begun to explore. The question lingers, unanswered. The group stands, shifting uneasily, suddenly feeling exposed. Had Miss Marple truly solved the mystery tonight, or was she simply letting them think it was over? What else had she seen? What else had she noticed? What was she holding back? And then, just as they turn to leave, the sound of a floorboard creaking breaks the silence. It's faint, almost imperceptible, but it's there. A movement, perhaps a figure in the shadows, or just the shift of the house settling into its ancient bones. No one speaks, but they all know something isn't quite right. The door opens, and the group steps into the night, each person looking over their shoulder one last time, wondering if they are truly free from the tangled web Miss Marple has unraveled. But as the door closes behind them, the house seems to whisper. The silence is deafening. Miss Marple takes one last sip of her tea. She doesn't smile this time, there is no need. The game is far from over. It never truly ends. And somewhere, in the shadows, the faint sound of a distant, unsettling laugh echoes through the empty room. Cliffhanger ending. A soft click. The door, which they thought was locked, slowly creaks open again, just a fraction. A figure stands in the darkened doorway, barely visible, a silhouette against the moonlight. The guests freeze. They haven't left yet. They haven't gone far enough to be safe. The figure steps forward, and the door slams shut, cutting off the last of the light. Then silence. Miss Marple doesn't react. She knows who it is. But they don't. And they won't until it's too late. What happens when a powerful formula is stolen and a brilliant mind is murdered? Let's uncover the secrets of black coffee. The grand mansion of Sir Claude Amory looms on the outskirts of the sleepy town, its towering windows casting long shadows in the pale light of early morning. The air is heavy, thick with an unspoken tension, as though the very walls of the house are holding their breath. Inside, the mansion is eerily silent, save for the soft ticking of an ancient grandfather clock that seems to mock the stillness. In Sir Claude's private study, the only light comes from the flickering flame of a solitary candle, casting long, quivering shadows across the room. The walls, lined with shelves of leather-bound books, are filled with the scent of polished wood and dust. The elderly man, Sir Claude, sits hunched over his desk, his gnarled hands trembling slightly as he examines a piece of paper with a complex formula, a breakthrough that could change the course of history. His mind races, both with excitement and dread. This formula, vital for national security, holds immense power, but it is a power that could easily slip through his fingers. His gaze shifts from the paper to the room around him, his mind buzzing with one chilling thought. Someone in this very house has betrayed him. A traitor, a thief the formula is missing. He narrows his eyes, feeling a growing unease. The servants, the guests, all of them have secrets, and they all stand to gain something from the disappearance of this dangerous formula. He makes a decision, his voice shaking but firm as he calls for his guests to gather. "Return it," he warns, his tone cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Return the formula before I expose it to the world, all of you, before it is too late." But there is no answer. The guests linger in the shadows of the house, as though too afraid to move. Sir Claude's sharp eyes scan their faces, reading the hidden emotions that flicker behind their eyes. Guilt, fear, desperation. He knows that one among them is guilty, and that the night will reveal all. As the clock strikes midnight, Sir Claude pours himself a cup of coffee, his hands steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The dark liquid swirls as he lifts the cup to his lips, unaware that it holds the poison that will seal his fate. The bitterness of the brew fills his mouth as he takes a slow sip, his eyes never leaving the formula. The last thing he feels is the warmth of the coffee and then an unbearable coldness. Suddenly his body goes rigid. The room tilts, and the world blurs into darkness. Sir Claude crumples forward, his face falling onto the desk, his fingers twitching slightly before going still. The formula, once held so tightly in his grasp, slips from his fingers, its contents spilling into the room like the final act of a tragedy. The next morning, the house is alive with frantic whispers. A maid, her face pale as paper, stumbles across the threshold of the study. Her scream pierces the air, waking everyone from their slumber. Sir Claude's lifeless body lies slumped across his desk, his face contorted in an expression of terror, eyes wide open, staring at the formula that is no longer there. Poisoned, murdered. And the formula, the very key to the nation's safety, has vanished without a trace. The guests are immediately summoned to the study, but their faces are inscrutable. The atmosphere is suffocating, charged with a strange mixture of fear and confusion. Who could have done this? Who among them could have betrayed Sir Claude? And why? The tension hangs thick in the air, with only one certainty. The formula is gone, and with it, the one man who could have prevented disaster. As the investigation begins, no one is above suspicion. But with every answer, another question arises, each more disturbing than the last. The house that once seemed so safe now feels like a prison. And the walls, which once held secrets of power and discovery, now hold the terrible truth of murder. The clock ticks on, each second heavier than the last. Cliffhanger ending. As the investigation deepens, one question gnaws at the edges of Poirot's mind. Could the killer be hiding in plain sight? The study holds no answers, and the suspects have grown nervous, their secrets threatening to spill over. Poirot's eyes dart across the room, and just as he is about to speak, a sudden noise echoes from behind the walls of the study. A hidden passage. The sound of footsteps, quiet but deliberate. Someone is watching. Someone is waiting. And Poirot, with his sharp instincts, knows that the most dangerous game is yet to come. The door to the study creaks as a figure steps inside, but is it too late? Or has the formula been hidden even deeper than anyone suspected? The answer lingers, just out of reach, and the scene fades to black. The investigation begins. The mansion is now a hive of anxiety. The morning light, which had once spilled through the grand windows in warmth, now feels cold and oppressive. The distant hum of whispers fills the air as Poirot, along with his loyal assistant Captain Hastings, steps onto the scene. Hercule Poirot enters the study with a calm and almost unnerving serenity, his sharp, calculating eye scanning every detail of the room. His small, neatly trimmed mustache twitches slightly, and his gaze shifts from Sir Claude's lifeless body to the disarray around the desk. Every object in the room seems out of place, but it's the people that intrigue him most. There are no obvious signs of struggle. The only clue is the empty coffee cup, sitting innocently beside the body, its dark contents mocking Sir Claude's last moments of life. Poirot's gaze hardens, but his demeanor remains measured. He turns to Captain Hastings, his ever-present companion, who stands by with an air of solemn curiosity. Poirot's mind is already at work, calculating, analyzing, working through the strands of suspicion. This case, Poirot mutters to himself, his voice low yet heavy with intent, is not just about a murder. It is about something far darker. As he begins to speak, his voice is calm but commanding, drawing the attention of the household. Every guest is present in the room, some pale with fear, others fidgeting, their nervousness palpable. Poirot's eyes flicker to each of them with methodical precision, taking in every subtle shift of emotion. His intuition sharpens. He knows without a single word being spoken that one of them holds the key to the truth. His first move is simple, yet brilliant. He calls for them to speak one by one, to recount their actions during the fateful night. The first to speak is Heine, Sir Claude's wife. Her eyes are hollow, drained of emotion, yet they flicker nervously under Poirot's unblinking stare. Her voice cracks as she recounts the night, detailing her late-night wanderings through the mansion, but Poirot can hear the unease in her words. Something is off, a hint of fear behind her poised exterior. The way she shifts her hands, the tremor that briefly touches her lips, Poirot is watching every movement. He knows instinctively that beneath this fragile facade is a woman desperate to hide her true feelings. His eyes narrow. Next is Imran, Sir Claude's old friend. His demeanor is calm, almost too calm. But Poirot's eyes are drawn to the slight twitch in Imran's left eye, the way his fingers unconsciously drum the surface of his chair. Poirot's instincts tell him that this man is hiding a deeper connection to Sir Claude than he's letting on. Poirot's mind flashes to the unspoken histories between them, the long years of friendship that may have been twisted by resentment, jealousy, or something far worse. What was it that Sir Claude knew about Imran? Poirot presses, his voice gentle but unyielding, as he tries to unravel the tension hidden beneath his words. Then there's Samar, the lawyer, whose composed facade cracks only when he speaks of his financial troubles. His past, littered with shady dealings, seems to catch up with him in Poirot's probing gaze. His words are careful, measured, as if he knows exactly what to say, what to leave out. But Poirot's mind is already ahead, calculating the tangled web of deceit and personal grievances that could make Samar the perfect suspect. Was it desperation, or a calculated move? Poirot watches him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He's playing a game of chess, and Poirot is several moves ahead. Poirot listens intently, the wheels of his mind turning, as he observes the guest's emotions. Every word, every gesture, every hesitation is recorded by his sharp perception. Yet, despite all his observations, Poirot's focus never wavers. For beneath all these secrets, the heart of the mystery remains, the formula, the key to national security. Who would kill for it, and why? Who would kill for it, and why? As Poirot carefully listens to each confession, something begins to form, a pattern that only he can see. The deeper he goes, the more he senses the ghosts of personal betrayals, whispered resentments, and hidden passions. Each of these guests holds a piece of the puzzle, but none is telling the whole truth. They are all hiding something, and Poirot knows it. What he does not know is the reason for the lies, the motive behind their carefully curated facades. Poirot's investigation, however, is not just about solving a crime. There is an emotional weight to this case, something that has begun to gnaw at him. He begins to see echoes of his own past in the eyes of the suspects. Their hidden regrets, their unspoken emotions, resonate with him. In particular, Heine's frail state reminds him of a woman he once knew, someone dear to him whose fate he never truly understood. It is a connection that haunts him, urging him to solve the case, but also to confront the long-buried emotions of his own life. The weight of his responsibility as a detective is not lost on Poirot. He realizes that each suspect represents not just a potential killer, but a complex human being, struggling with emotions far beyond the confines of this mansion. He knows this investigation will change the course of their lives, but what about his own? Cliffhanger ending. Just as Poirot finishes his observations and prepares to confront the suspects with his insights, a sudden, sharp noise interrupts the silence. It's a soft scraping sound from behind the walls, faint but unmistakable. Poirot's eyes narrow. "Did you hear that?" he asks, his voice steady, betraying no surprise. Captain Hastings looks around nervously, his hand instinctively reaching for his pistol. But Poirot holds up a hand, signaling for quiet. Another scraping noise, followed by a faint whisper too faint to make out, but enough to make the air in the room grow thicker. Poirot's eyes dart toward the bookcase in the corner, where a peculiar shadow now falls. A book on the shelf seems slightly out of place, its spine uneven with the others. Poirot's heart races, and his mind shifts gears, sensing that this is no ordinary house. This is a house of secrets, a house that hides far more than it reveals. The suspects stand frozen, their faces drained of color. Is there a hidden passage in the mansion, What are they trying to keep from Poirot? Poirot's gaze lingers on the bookcase, his mind already racing ahead. The answer lies behind that shelf. But will he be able to uncover it before another tragedy strikes? The sound of footsteps slow, deliberate echoes through the hall. The investigation has only just begun, but Poirot feels the weight of the house closing in on him. The secrets are starting to surface, and soon there will be no hiding from them. The suspects. The investigation deepens, and Hercule Poirot's methodical mind begins to piece together the fragments of the case. The mansion feels heavier now, like it's closing in on everyone within its walls. As Poirot continues to observe the guests, each one becomes an enigma wrapped in contradictions, their secrets lurking beneath the surface like shadows that refuse to be chased away by the light of truth. Character dynamics and secrets. Hina, the wife. Hina, Sir Claude's wife, seems like a woman suffocated by the weight of her own life. To an outsider, she appears fragile, composed, even delicate, but Poirot's sharp eyes catch the fleeting glimmers of something darker, a restrained anger that simmers just beneath her porcelain surface. She is constantly on edge, nervously clutching at the hem of her dress, her hands shaking whenever she thinks no one is watching. Her emotions are bottled up so tightly that one wrong move could shatter her completely. Sir Claude's intellectual brilliance had always overshadowed her, and she's lived in the shadow of his achievements, never able to escape the oppressive grip of his genius. But Poirot senses that her calm demeanor is a mask, one hiding a well of deep resentment. The tension between them was palpable, a quiet storm ready to explode. Poirot recalls her hushed arguments with Sir Claude in the days leading up to the murder. Were these fights about the formula, or was there something more personal at play? What did she know about her husband's discovery? And more importantly, did she play a part in his downfall? Imran, the old friend. Then there's Imran, Sir Claude's old friend. He carries the air of someone who has lived through much, someone whose past is not as simple as it seems. He exudes an unnatural calm, too calm for someone in the midst of a murder investigation. Imran avoids eye contact, his gaze darting around the room like a man who is constantly watching his back. Poirot can see through the act. There's a depth to Imran's nervousness, something Poirot doesn't yet understand, but can feel. Their friendship, Poirot discovers, was not as simple as it seemed. Sir Claude had always been the intellectual giant, the one everyone admired, while Imran had been relegated to the background, always playing second fiddle. But there were whispers of a rivalry between them, a rivalry rooted in the belief that Sir Claude had stolen something that was rightfully Imran's. Could that something have been the formula? Or perhaps it was something far more personal, something that goes beyond mere ambition. Samar, the lawyer. Samar, the lawyer, stands out as another intriguing figure. A descendant of the mansion's original owners, he holds a sense of entitlement to the estate. His financial troubles are well known, and Poirot can see the way Samar's eyes flicker with nervousness whenever the conversation turns to money. There's a history here, a deep undercurrent of resentment. Poirot learns that Samar had been fighting with Sir Claude over control of the mansion for years. Sir Claude's discovery of the formula had put Samar in a difficult position, threatening his last hopes of financial stability. Was Samar willing to do anything to gain control, even murder? Poirot doesn't dismiss the possibility, but there's a deeper connection to the mansion's history, something Samar isn't telling. Could he have known about the formula all along? The twist. Poirot, ever so meticulous, begins to uncover the hidden threads that bind the suspects. Each one holds a personal stake in Sir Claude's discovery. Each one is driven by their own desires and fears. As Poirot examines their relationships, a chilling realization begins to form. They are not simply connected by the murder, but by a web of deceit, betrayal, and long-buried emotions that go far beyond the formula. It is while inspecting Hina's personal belongings that Poirot makes a discovery that shakes him to the core. Hidden in a drawer, under a pile of delicate lace, he finds a small leather-bound diary, Hina's most private thoughts. Opening it cautiously, Poirot's eyes scan the entries, each word written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. The diary is filled with expressions of love and longing, But there's one entry that catches Poirot's attention. It is dated just weeks before Sir Claude's death. The words are sharp, bitter, and laden with guilt. I betrayed him. I trusted him, but he was never mine. He never saw me as his equal. I thought he loved me, but I was nothing more than his trophy. The formula was our future, but now it will be my ruin. Poirot feels the weight of those words. Betrayal, anger, guilt, these emotions reverberate in the quiet space between him and Heine's confession. It becomes clear. Hina's involvement in the murder was more than just a passive bystander. She had a hand in it, in some way. Her resentment toward Sir Claude had grown over the years, and the formula, the very thing that had become the center of their relationship, had now become the catalyst for something far darker. Could Hina have orchestrated the murder out of jealousy and frustration? Or was she an accomplice in a plan set in motion by someone else? Poirot cannot yet say, but the connections are undeniable. Cliffhanger ending. As Poirot reflects on this new revelation, the atmosphere in the mansion grows heavier. There's an underlying tension in the air, as if something is about to break. Poirot is interrupted by the sudden sound of a loud crash from upstairs. His head snaps in the direction of the noise, his instincts immediately on alert. Captain Hastings reacts first, rushing toward the stairs with Poirot hot on his heels. They reach the second floor in time to see Imran, his face pale and wild-eyed, standing over a broken vase in the hallway. His hands tremble as he tries to explain, but his words are incoherent. Poirot steps forward, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What happened here?" Poirot demands, his voice steady, but with a note of command that makes Imran falter. Imran looks at Poirot, his face filled with a mix of panic and something else. Poirot recognizes all too well. It's fear, but it's not just fear of the investigation. It's the fear of something darker, something much more personal. Before Poirot can question him further, the air is pierced by another sound, a faint, hollow knocking, coming from behind the wall. Poirot freezes, his pulse quickening. Could this be the clue that unravels everything? Hastings moves to investigate, but Poirot's eyes are already darting back to the suspects gathered below. One of them knows something, and they are desperate to keep it hidden. The mansion is closing in around them, and with every twist, the truth becomes more elusive. Will Poirot uncover the full extent of the betrayal before another life is lost? As the knocking grows louder, Poirot knows one thing for sure. Nothing in this house is what it seems. The midpoint. The investigation has spiraled deeper into the heart of the mansion, each turn revealing more unsettling truths. Hercule Poirot's sharp mind and unyielding calm have served him well, but the more he uncovers, the heavier the weight of the mansion's secrets becomes. The walls seem to close in, suffocating the air with suspicion. Every room feels like a stage for lies, and each suspect seems to hold their own hidden darkness, a darkness that Poirot is determined to uncover. A shocking discovery. It's late in the afternoon when Poirot, feeling the oppressive weight of his thoughts, retreats to the private study of Sir Claude Amory. The room where Sir Claude spent most of his hours poring over his brilliant formula now holds only a lingering sense of loss and foreboding. As Poirot carefully examines the room for any overlooked clue, his hand brushes against a hidden drawer in Sir Claude's desk. His brow furrows, the soft click of the mechanism barely audible as the drawer slides open, revealing a weathered leather-bound journal. The journal, thick with age, falls open to a page marked with an elegant, though cryptic, passage. Poirot's sharp eyes scan the text, a sense of dread creeping over him as he reads aloud to himself. "I have discovered a room that should not exist. It is hidden, obscured from view. In it, I shall perform the experiments that could change the world. But those around me, I fear they do not understand. I have made enemies, and I cannot trust them with what I know. This room must remain a secret for my safety and for the safety of all. The formula. The truth will be mine alone to hold." Poirot's mind races as he processes the words, a hidden room. Sir Claude had spoken of his intellectual pursuits in private, but nothing had prepared Poirot for the revelation that the man had concealed such an important part of his work within his own mansion. What was Sir Claude working on in secret? Was the formula merely the tip of the iceberg, something far more dangerous than anyone had realized? And if this room contained something far more valuable than the formula, could someone have killed to prevent its discovery? Poirot's fingers tremble slightly as he turns the page, a sense of urgency rising within him. There are no directions, no detailed description of where this room might be located. It is as though Sir Claude wanted it to remain lost in time, perhaps hoping that his death would erase all traces of its existence. But Poirot cannot let go of the feeling that this hidden space holds the key to everything. Emotional tension. Poirot can feel the emotional tension rising, not just within the mansion, but within each of the people who inhabit it. As he speaks with the suspects, he senses the undercurrents of guilt, anger, and fear that each of them is desperately trying to suppress. Their emotions are raw, their motives clouded by jealousy, regret, and resentment. Hina, the wife, is visibly distressed as Poirot presses her about her knowledge of the hidden room. Her frailty becomes apparent, the cracks in her composure impossible to ignore. Her eyes flicker with something unspoken when Poirot mentions Sir Claude's secret. She almost seems to tremble, as if her very soul is tied to the truth of what lies behind the mansion's walls. Could she know where the room is? And if she did, why would she hide it? Imran, Sir Claude's old friend, remains aloof, but Poirot sees the flicker of fear in his eyes when the conversation turns to Sir Claude's intellectual pursuits. The years of friendship have been marred by tension, by a deep-seated rivalry that Poirot now knows was far from friendly. What had Imran done in the past to betray Sir Claude's trust? And what was the price of that betrayal? Samar, the lawyer, is still calculating, his mind running through the possible benefits of owning the mansion. But as Poirot presses him, there's something almost frantic in the way Samar deflects questions about Sir Claude's secret work. He's hiding something far more than just his financial troubles. Poirot wonders if Samar, too, had known about the hidden room and its contents, and if the lure of wealth and power was enough to turn him against Sir Claude. Poirot's thoughts are interrupted as he catches sight of something on the table, an envelope, partially open, its contents seemingly discarded in haste. He picks it up, his breath catching as he reads the hastily scrawled words. "Leave now, or you will regret it." The warning is unmistakable. Someone is trying to stop Poirot from uncovering the truth. Someone is willing to go to any lengths to prevent him from finding the hidden room and perhaps the answers that lie within it. Rising danger. Poirot's resolve strengthens. He realizes that the walls are closing in not just on Sir Claude's secrets, but on his own investigation. The murderer is not just hiding their guilt, they are actively trying to sabotage Poirot's progress, to push him out before the truth is revealed. The stakes are higher now. Poirot's calm, calculating demeanor gives way to an undercurrent of urgency. The more he digs, the more dangerous the situation becomes. He knows that if he is not careful, he may become the next victim. That evening, as Poirot and Captain Hastings retire for the night, the air in the mansion grows colder. Poirot senses an unfamiliar stillness, as if the very building is holding its breath. Suddenly the lights flicker, and a sharp, loud knock echoes through the corridor. Poirot stiffens, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. Hastings, ever the practical one, opens the door. But when he returns, his face has gone pale. "There's a message," Hastings says, voice trembling. Poirot takes the note from his assistant, his heart sinking as he reads it aloud. "Stop now, or you will never leave this house." Poirot's mind races. Who would be bold enough to send such a message? And why? It's clear that someone wants him gone, wants the investigation to end before the truth is exposed. But why such desperation? What are they trying to hide? Cliffhanger ending. As Poirot stands by the window, pondering the dangers that have now enveloped him, the mansion seems to come alive around him, its creaks and groans, as if reacting to the tension that has thickened the air. Suddenly, from across the room, he hears a sound. A faint, almost imperceptible creaking, like the whisper of a door opening in the dead of night. Poirot's eyes narrow. He steps cautiously toward the source of the noise, Every fiber of his being screams that something is about to happen, something that will change everything. The door to Sir Claude's private study slowly swings open. The dim light from the hallway spills into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. Poirot steps forward, heart pounding, only to stop dead in his tracks as he sees a figure standing in the doorway, a figure he never expected. And just like that, the world around him seems to collapse. Who is standing in the doorway? The suspense builds, the mystery deepens, and Poirot is left with only one question. Can he trust anyone in this house? The revelation that waits on the other side of the door could be the key to everything, or it could be the final deadly trap. Show Carla holding the faded photograph with a voiceover. 16 years ago, a crime shook the art world. Was it love, betrayal, or something darker? The morning sun was sharp and bright, casting long, angled shadows across the prison yard as Carla stood frozen before the cold, gray bars of her mother's cell. 16 years had passed since the tragic night of the murder, yet for Carla, time had not softened the edges of the past. It had only sharpened them, filling her with more questions, more doubt. In her trembling hand, Carla clutched the faded photograph, its edges curled and fragile from years of being handled. Amias Crail, her famous artist father, and her mother Caroline, both laughing in a moment of happiness that now felt so distant it could have been a dream. Carla's gaze shifted between the photo and the woman before her, locked away behind iron bars. Her mother, silent and withdrawn, wearing the same haunted expression that had been etched into her face since that fateful night. Carla's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the stillness. "Mummy didn't kill him. I know she didn't." Her words felt like an anchor, a plea to herself more than a statement. She spoke with such certainty, but the prison walls seemed to close in tighter, each echo of her voice filled with a haunting question she could not answer. Caroline's eyes, dull and tired, lifted to meet Carla's gaze, but there was no reassurance there. No spark of belief, only the deep weight of years spent in isolation and regret. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her face was a mask of sorrow, a woman who had lost everything: her freedom, her husband, her reputation, yet still, some flicker of something remained in her gaze. It was that flicker Carla clung to, the faint hope that there was something, someone, who could prove her mother's innocence. Carla's hand tightened around the photograph, her fingers pressing hard into the worn edges of the paper. "I'll find the truth, Mummy. I swear it. I'll find the truth. We can't live like this forever." But Carla knew there was only one man who could help her. She turned away from the cell, her heart beating faster, a mixture of dread and anticipation twisting in her chest. She knew where she had to go, who she had to turn to: Hercule Poirot, the world-renowned detective, whose sharp mind had solved countless mysteries. If anyone could untangle the lies and confusion surrounding her father's murder, it was him. As she walked away from the prison, the air felt thick with the weight of the past. Carla's footsteps echoed on the stone floor, the sound almost oppressive, as though the very walls were whispering secrets she was yet to understand. The photograph she clutched so tightly seemed to burn in her hands, a symbol of everything she had, lost everything she still wanted to believe in. Cliffhanger ending. Just as Carla reached the prison gates, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message. "I know what you're planning. Don't go to Poirot. You'll regret it." A chill ran down Carla's spine. She stared at the words, her mind racing. Who had sent this, and why? The air around her felt suddenly colder, the world spinning with possibilities. Carla's breath quickened as she looked over her shoulder, but no one was there. A flicker of movement in the distance caught her eye, but it vanished before she could make sense of it. Was someone watching her? Without a moment's hesitation, she stuffed the phone back into her pocket, her mind set on one thing: finding Poirot no matter what. But the question remained: who wanted her to stop, and why? With her heart pounding in her chest, Carla stepped out into the bright morning, the shadows of doubt growing longer with every passing second. And as the gates closed behind her, a voice echoed in the silence, one that would haunt her as she took the first step towards the truth. The past never lets go, Carla. It never lets go. The soft thud of the train's wheels on the tracks was the only sound that filled the air as Carla and Hercule Poirot made their way to the grand estate. A sense of anticipation, a mix of dread and hope, hung heavily in the silence between them. Carla, despite the weight of the case pressing down on her, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Poirot's calm presence seemed to cut through the tension, his sharp eyes missing nothing, yet offering no comfort. He was a man of logic, not of promises. They arrived at the estate as the afternoon sun bathed the sprawling grounds in an amber glow. The house loomed before them, an imposing monument to a life once full of passion, now shadowed by murder and suspicion. The windows, dark and lifeless, looked like eyes that once saw a world of brilliance, now blind to everything except the pain of the past. Poirot stepped out of the carriage, his polished shoes making a soft click against the cobblestones as he turned to Carla. His face remained impassive, but there was an unmistakable glint of intrigue in his eyes. "Ah, mademoiselle, it is here that everything began. The murder, the deceit, the ruin, and now perhaps the truth." Carla nodded, her throat dry, her eyes scanning the mansion that had once been a place of beauty, now haunted by shadows of grief. "This is where he died, where my father was murdered." Poirot gave a small nod, his mind already at work. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the estate as though it held the answers to 1,000 unspoken questions. As they entered the mansion, the smell of old wood and faded paint greeted them, mingled with the faint scent of something, still lingering from that night. The silence in the house was deafening, the weight of its memories pressing down on them. Each room they passed seemed to breathe with the echoes of the past. The grand staircase, where Amias had been found. The painting gallery, where his works once shone brightly, each canvas now a monument to a life cut short. But it was the studio that drew Poirot's attention. He stepped inside with a slow, deliberate pace, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The easels, the paintbrushes, the unfinished canvases, all of it frozen in time. Poirot muttered, the words rolling off his tongue like a riddle. "Not everything is as it seems." Carla's eyes flicked nervously between him and the room, a cold shiver running down her spine. "What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze lingered on the unfinished painting of a woman who resembled Caroline, but the expression was all wrong, as though the artist had captured something else entirely. He stepped closer, his gloved hand brushing the canvas, as if searching for something hidden beneath the layers of oil paint. "The emotions of the artist are woven into the brushstrokes," Poirot mused. Amias Kral, the man who lived in a world of beauty, but also a man filled with jealousies, rivalries, and passions, a man who could inspire love and hatred. Carla's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think?" Poirot raised a finger to his lips, his gaze shifting to the window, where the light flickered as clouds passed overhead. "I think, mademoiselle, that this is no ordinary murder. And what is more, I think that whoever did this has played a game so clever, so carefully constructed, that even the best of us may fail to see the truth until it is too late." As they moved through the estate, Poirot's keen eyes absorbed every detail, noting the smallest of clues, the slight scuff marks on the floor, the position of the furniture, the faint scent of perfume lingering in the air, a scent that was far too familiar. It was a signature, one that no one would have noticed but him. Poirot paused before the staircase, his eyes narrowing. There was a struggle here. Not the kind of struggle you would expect from a woman trapped in a moment of passion. No, mademoiselle, this was something else. A well-orchestrated performance. A plan. Carla's stomach twisted with unease. "What do you mean?" Poirot's gaze was piercing. "The truth hides in plain sight, but it is masked by deception. Whoever murdered Amias Kral did not do so out of a fit of rage. They did so out of necessity." A sound from the upper floor caught their attention, a soft creak of a door, followed by a hushed murmur, as if someone was watching them from the shadows. Carla froze, her breath catching in her throat. Poirot's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes flicked to the staircase, his fingers tightening around the walking cane he always carried. "Someone is here," he said, his voice low and steady. But who? Carla's pulse raced, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorframe for support. She had expected the past to be full of ghosts, but not like this, alive, present, and dangerous. Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the darkened upper floors. "We must be careful now, mademoiselle. The truth is not just hidden, it is guarded, and whoever is watching us is playing their own game." The moment seemed to stretch, the silence suffocating, until a door on the second floor creaked open, and a figure emerged from the shadows, their face half concealed by the darkness. Carla's breath hitched in her chest. Poirot's expression didn't change, but his words were a warning, sharp and steady. "The game is afoot, and it is more dangerous than you realize." Cliffhanger ending. The figure on the staircase took a step forward, their silhouette coming into clearer view. Yet the identity remained hidden. A chill ran down Carla's spine as she realized they were not alone, and worse, this was not a coincidence. Poirot's voice broke the tension. "We are being watched, mademoiselle. But the question is, who is playing this dangerous game, and what do they know?" The figure froze, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Then, in a voice Carla barely recognized, a whisper carried down the stairs, "You shouldn't have come here." And just like that, the room grew colder, the shadows darker. Poirot's eyes gleamed with a knowing, dangerous light. The truth had just taken a deadly turn. Who was the figure? And what had they seen? The mystery was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The suspects. The small, quaint village near the Creole estate was eerily quiet as Poirot and Carla made their way through the cobbled streets, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The air felt thick with tension, as if the very earth beneath their feet held the secrets of a tragedy long buried. The first stop on their investigation was to speak with Caroline Creole, the woman who had spent years in prison for the murder of her husband. They arrived at a small, nondescript cottage. The garden, overgrown with ivy, was a stark contrast to the grand estate they had just left behind. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old books and dust. Caroline sat in a chair by the window, her once beautiful face now marked by years of solitude and regret. Her eyes, hollow and distant, flickered with recognition as she saw her daughter. Carla stepped forward, her voice a whisper. "Mum, I need to know the truth. You didn't kill him, did you?" Caroline's lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely audible. "I wish I could say it wasn't me, Carla, but I can't. The evidence, it was all against me. The whole world thought I killed him, and I still don't know if I can prove otherwise." Poirot observed silently from the corner, his piercing eyes watching Caroline closely. There was something in her voice, a note of sorrow, but also something deeper. Guilt? Fear? Or was she hiding something more? He stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Madame Creole," Poirot began, his accent cutting through the thick silence. "It is clear to me that you carry the weight of this tragedy. But one thing is certain. The truth is never as simple as it seems. We will uncover what happened on that day. But I must ask, what of your husband's enemies? Could there have been anyone who wanted him dead?" Caroline's eyes darted away, as though the question cut too deep. Amias had many admirers, but also enemies. A man like him, with such a fiery spirit, makes enemies wherever he goes. Poirot nodded, noting the hesitation in her tone. "Thank you, Madame Creole. We shall speak again." Next, they visited Elsa, Amias's young lover, who had been the source of much gossip and speculation. Her cottage was small but vibrant, with flowers spilling over the windowsill, a stark contrast to the dark cloud of suspicion that hovered over her. When they arrived, Elsa was sitting by a fire, a glass of wine in hand. Her fiery red hair, once the symbol of her passionate affair with Amias, now seemed to mirror the intensity of her emotions. Carla's hand tightened into a fist as she entered. "Elsa," she said, her voice trembling, "did you love him?" Elsa's eyes were a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "Of course I loved him," she said, her voice steady but with an edge. "But that doesn't mean I killed him. No, I didn't kill Amias. But someone else did, someone who wanted to take him away from me." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. You loved him, yet you were also jealous of others who were close to him. Is it possible that your love turned into something darker? A passion so fierce it led to something unforgivable. Elsa's expression hardened, and she shot a glance at Carla before speaking. I didn't kill him, but I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. Don't think I didn't know about the others. The other women in his life. Poirot watched her closely, his mind calculating the angles. Yes, madame, your jealousy is a powerful force, but is it enough to make someone commit murder? Perhaps. Or perhaps there is something more, something we have yet to uncover. With that, they moved on to Philip Blake, Amyas's closest friend, and the one who should have known him best. Yet, the more Poirot heard about Philip, the more he felt a sense of unease. Philip's resentment towards Amyas was known. Amyas's success, his marriage, his talents, everything Philip wanted but could never have. They found Philip in a dimly lit office surrounded by papers and old photographs. He greeted them with a tight smile that never quite reached his eyes. Philip Blake, Poirot said, his voice calm but filled with sharpness. You were a close friend of Amyas Crowell, but I must ask, did you resent him? Philip looked away for a moment, his jaw clenching. Resent him? I respected him, but he had everything. Everything I ever wanted. His talent, his wife, his life. He could do no wrong in the eyes of the world. Carla's eyes flashed with suspicion. Are you saying you had no motive to harm him? Philip's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Motive? Perhaps not. But don't think I wasn't angry. You think I didn't see how everyone adored him? How he took everything I ever wanted? Poirot's eyes flickered as he studied Philip's words. A man full of bitterness, a man who would do anything to change his fate. Would you be capable of murder, Monsieur Blake? Philip's gaze sharpened, but he said nothing. Finally, they visited Miss Violet Marsh, the maid who had worked for the Crale family for years. She was an enigma, quiet and observant, yet with an unknown past. Violet had been a constant presence in the house, but no one knew much about her history. As they sat with her, Poirot's eyes never left her face. I know you worked for the Crales for many years, Poirot began, his voice warm yet probing. You must have seen much, Madame Marsh. The life of Amyas Crale, his relationships, his dealings. Violet looked at Poirot, her expression unreadable. I've seen many things in my time, but what I know about Amyas, well, some things are better left forgotten. People think they know the truth, but they don't. They never do. Carla leaned forward, her voice tense. What do you mean? Did you know something that could change everything? Violet's lips curled into a faint smile, but her eyes were cold. I know more than you think, Mademoiselle Crale, but knowing something doesn't always mean you should speak of it. Poirot's gaze never wavered as he leaned forward, his voice a whisper. You are a woman who knows the power of secrets, Madame Marsh, and sometimes secrets are the deadliest weapon of all. Cliffhanger ending. As the conversation wound down, Poirot's mind was buzzing with all the new information. Each person had a motive, a reason for wanting Amyas dead. But nothing quite added up. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and it was only a matter of time before they could see the full picture. Carla's heart raced as she looked at Poirot. What do you think? Who did it? Poirot's eyes were thoughtful, almost distant. Ah, mademoiselle, this case is like a labyrinth. One wrong turn, and we will be lost forever. But there is one thing I know: the truth is never as simple as it seems. Just as they were about to leave, a servant hurried toward them, breathless and pale. Monsieur Poirot, he stammered, there's been a discovery. You need to come quickly. The body of another person has been found. Poirot's gaze snapped to Carla, his expression darkening. Another murder. It seems someone is desperate to keep their secrets buried. But this will only make things more interesting. The scene ended in chilling silence, as the weight of the revelation settled over them like a storm. A new victim, a new twist. The game was far from over. And Poirot knew this time the stakes were higher than ever. The midpoint. The clock ticked relentlessly in the silence of Poirot's study as he sat hunched over a collection of paper-sold letters, photographs, and records from the Crail family. The walls of his temporary office seemed to close in, each piece of evidence heavy with the weight of untold secrets. Carla sat nearby, her eyes fixed on him, her face a mirror of both hope and fear. Poirot had been quiet for some time, his brow furrowed in deep thought. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached for a faded envelope he had just discovered, tucked away inside one of Amyas's old sketchbooks. The letter, yellowed with age, was written in Amyas's unmistakable hand. Poirot's fingers hovered over it for a moment, the sense of something crucial slipping just out of reach. He unfolded it gently, his eyes scanning the words. The truth is not as simple as it seems. There is a revelation that will shake everything. Some will rejoice, and some will fall. The last few words of the letter were torn, as if someone had violently ripped it, leaving behind only the remnants of a cryptic message. Poirot's sharp gaze flickered to Carla, who had been watching him intently. "What does it mean, Monsieur Poirot?" Carla's voice was thick with urgency. Poirot didn't immediately answer, lost in his own thoughts. The phrase "fall" lingered in his mind, echoing with an ominous warning. The more he read, the more the case began to unravel, like a tightly wound rope loosening with every turn. There was a pattern here, a trail of hidden emotions and betrayals that had been buried for too long. Poirot placed the letter down gently, his hand steady despite the growing tension in the air. "Mademoiselle Crail, the past does not simply fade away. It lingers, like a shadow that cannot be shaken off." They continued their investigation, but Poirot's mind was racing. Caroline. Amyas's wife, was she truly the only one who had reason to kill? As Poirot dug deeper into the history of the Crail family, things became murkier. It seemed there were more players in this twisted drama than he had first suspected. The next revelation came when Poirot interviewed Elsa again. This time her demeanor was different, more fragile, as if a weight had settled heavily on her shoulders. She sat in the same chair by the fire, her fingers twisting nervously around the rim of her wineglass. Poirot, ever the patient investigator, leaned forward. "Mademoiselle Elsa," he began, his voice calm but edged with a quiet intensity. "There is something I must know. Was Amyas truly yours alone? Did he share his affections with others?" Elsa's face paled, and for a moment her eyes darted away, as if the question had struck too close to a wound she had been trying to forget. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. "Do you think I didn't know?" she asked, the words sharp but tinged with pain. "I knew about Caroline. I knew about all the others. But I loved him, Poirot. I loved him more than anything in this world." Poirot's gaze never wavered, his mind piecing together the fragments of Elsa's confession. "And did he love you?" he asked, his voice steady but probing. Elsa closed her eyes, her lips trembling. "He promised me. He promised we would be together, but he never did. But that's not why I wanted him dead. No, Poirot. There's something you don't know." Poirot leaned in, sensing the shift in the conversation. "What is it, Mademoiselle Elsa?" Elsa hesitated for a moment, her face contorting with emotion. "I was pregnant with his child," she whispered. "I was carrying his baby when he died." The room seemed to still as Poirot absorbed her words. This was the piece of the puzzle he hadn't anticipated. Elsa had been carrying Amyas's child. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? And why had she been so evasive? Carla's face turned ashen as she took in Elsa's confession. "You were carrying his child, and yet you didn't say anything," she whispered, barely able to comprehend the depth of the betrayal that had just surfaced. Elsa's eyes darkened, filled with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "I didn't want anyone to know. Not after everything that happened. It's not just about the love I lost, it's about the lies, the deceit, the things that were hidden, even from me." Poirot's mind raced as he connected the dots. A woman in love, a lover betrayed, and a child that could have been the heir to everything Amyas held dear. Could Elsa have killed Amyas in a fit of jealousy, driven by the fear of losing him forever? But as Poirot pondered this, a sudden realization struck him. It wasn't just Elsa who had a reason to kill. Philip Blake, Amyas's closest friend, had been keeping a secret of his own, his obsession with Caroline, Amyas's wife. Poirot had already sensed the underlying tension between the two men. Philip had always resented Amyas's success, but was there something deeper at play? Had Philip been hiding his love for Caroline all along? And if he had, was he capable of murder to keep her for himself? Just as Poirot was beginning to connect these dots, a sudden event shook the investigation to its core. Poirot was walking back to his temporary residence, Carla by his side, when he noticed a shadow following them in the distance. He paused, instinctively reaching for his pocket watch as if something wasn't right. His eyes scanned the area, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Before he could react, a figure lunged at him from the darkness, knocking him to the ground with surprising strength. Carla screamed, but Poirot quickly regained his composure, using his sharp mind and reflexes to fend off the attacker. With a swift move, he managed to disarm the person, pinning them to the ground, but the figure wore a dark cloak that obscured their face. As Poirot's hand gripped the cloak, the figure managed to wriggle free and vanish into the night. As Poirot stood, his heart pounding, he caught a glimpse of something clutched in the figure's hand, an envelope. His eyes narrowed as he examined it, and on the front, written in a hasty scrawl, were the words, "Stop now, Oregon Moore will die." Poirot's gaze hardened, his mind now fully engaged. Someone was desperate to stop him from uncovering the truth. And as he stared at the empty street where the attacker had vanished, he knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back now. Cliffhanger ending. Poirot held the letter in his hands, the weight of the warning sinking in. "This is no longer just about Amyas Kral," he muttered, his voice low and filled with intensity. "This is about something much larger, much more dangerous." Carla looked up at him, her face pale. "What do we do now, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes were filled with resolve, his voice steady. "We continue. We must. The truth must come to light, no matter the cost." As they turned to leave, the distant sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Someone was still watching, someone who would stop at nothing to ensure the secrets of the Crail family stayed buried. And Poirot knew that the most dangerous part of the case was yet to come. The final act. The atmosphere in the Crail mansion was thick with anticipation, the weight of the mystery pressing down on Poirot and Carla as they made their way up the creaking stairs to the attic. The air was musty, suffocating with dust and old memories. The flickering light of Poirot's lamp cast long, haunting shadows on the forgotten treasures piled around theme-old trunks, faded furniture, and forgotten relics of a family long gone. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room, his mind already piecing together the final fragments of the puzzle. Carla followed closely behind, her face taut with worry. She had been with him through the unraveling of this case, but now, with each passing moment, the tension was unbearable. The truth was close, but it was also more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Poirot moved with purpose, his steps deliberate. "You see, Mademoiselle Carla, when a case is this complicated, there is always a final clue, a last piece that reveals the entire picture. It often lies hidden, in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered." He moved toward an old, forgotten chest in the corner of the room, its wood warped with age. He knelt before it, and with a practiced hand, gently pried it open. Inside was a canvas, rolled up and carefully tucked away, as if someone had wanted to keep it hidden from prying eyes. Poirot's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the feeling that he was on the verge of an earth-shattering revelation. He unfurled the canvas slowly, revealing a beautiful but troubling image, painting of Amyas Kral in his prime. The strokes were bold, capturing the essence of his passion and life. But as Poirot examined it more closely, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Beneath the layers of varnish, he could just make out a signature that shouldn't have been there. Carla leaned in, her breath catching in her throat. "What is it, Poirot?" she asked, her voice trembling. Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he peered closer, his eyes narrowing with realization. The signature was unmistakable. Philip Blake. Philip Blake. "But how?" Carla whispered, stunned by the revelation. "He's the one who—" Poirot cut her off, his voice low and filled with intense concentration. "No, mademoiselle, you are mistaken. The signature, it is not just a sign of ownership, it is a key to the truth." He stood up slowly, his mind racing as the pieces fell into place. The painting, hidden for so long, held the answer to the crime. The varnish had concealed not only the signature, but a much deeper secret tone that Philip Blake had never intended to reveal. But now it was clear. This was the final clue that would expose everything. The room seemed to close in around them as Poirot turned to face Carla. "You see, Mademoiselle Carla, the murder was never a crime of passion, but one of desperation. Someone wanted Amyas dead, someone who stood to lose everything if the truth came to light." Carla's face paled as she pieced together the information. But if Caroline wasn't the killer, then who? Poirot paused, his mind weaving the final strands of the tangled web. It was never about love. No, it was about fear. A fear of losing everything. Amyas was a man with many secrets. But the most dangerous secret he carried was his desire to paint the world as it really was, the truth, raw and unfiltered. And that truth, it threatened more than just the people he loved. The realization hit Carla like a blow to the chest. She stepped back, her mind whirling. "Philip? He killed Amyas?" Poirot nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "Yes, mademoiselle. Philip Blake, Amyas's best friend, harbored a secret passion for Caroline that he had never been able to let go of. But his true motive was not just jealousy. It was something far darker." The room seemed to grow colder as Poirot continued, his voice cutting through the thick silence. Philip Blake had always been resentful of Amyas's success, his fame. But when Amyas began painting portraits of Caroline, something inside Philip snapped. He couldn't bear the thought of Caroline falling in love with another man, especially not a man like Amyas, who had everything Philip lacked. Poirot turned toward the window, looking out over the estate, his eyes lost in thought. Philip had always been in Amyas's shadow, but now the shadow was too great for him to bear. He needed Caroline, and he needed Amyas out of the way. So he hatched a plan, a perfect crime, made to look like passion gone wrong. Carla's breath quickened as she realized the magnitude of the deception. But the painting, the signature, it was all part of his plan, wasn't it? To make us believe that Caroline was guilty. Poirot's eyes locked onto hers. Exactly. Philip staged the scene meticulously. The way Amyas's body was positioned, the clues that led us straight to Caroline, they were all designed to point to her. But what Philip didn't count on was your belief in your mother's innocence, mademoiselle. That belief, combined with the stubborn persistence of Poirot, has brought us to the truth. Carla's heart raced as she took in the enormity of what Poirot was saying. But before she could fully process the revelation, a sound echoed through the mansione. Loud, shuddering bang, followed by the sound of footsteps pounding through the hall. Poirot's gaze snapped to the door. "It is not over, mademoiselle," he murmured, his voice steady despite the growing danger. "Someone is trying to stop us from uncovering the truth. We must act quickly." Suddenly, the door burst open, and a shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. Philip Blake, his face twisted with rage. He was holding a revolver, his hand shaking as he pointed it directly at Poirot. "Stay back, Poirot," Philip shouted, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. No one can know the truth. No one can." Poirot stood still, his calm demeanor unwavering, as he faced the man who had orchestrated the entire tragedy. "Ah, Monsieur Blake," he said softly, his voice a mix of pity and resolve. "You are too late. The truth has already been uncovered." But Philip's face twisted into a maniacal grin. "You think you've solved it. You think you know everything. No one will stop me now." The sound of a gunshot shattered the silence, leaving Carla frozen in terror as Poirot stepped back, his eyes narrowed in shock. Cliffhanger ending. Just as the shot rang out, Poirot's figure disappeared into the shadows. The screen went black, and Carla's scream echoed in the silence. Had Poirot been struck? Was this the end of the great detective's investigation, or was there yet another twist to the story? The silence left only one question lingering in the air. Who would survive this game of deception? The grand estate was thick with tension. The once grandiose rooms now felt like a labyrinth of secrets, each shadow more oppressive than the last. Poirot stood at the head of the room, his back straight, his gaze piercing the faces of the gathered suspects. Caroline Crail, her face pale but determined. Elsa, who shifted nervously, glancing from one person to another. Philip Blake, his expression unreadable, but his body rigid with suppressed emotion. And Miss Violet Marsh, the quiet maid, who looked like a ghost haunting her own past. Poirot's calm demeanor belied the storm of emotions simmering in the room. It had taken him weeks, countless conversations, and hours of reflection to arrive at this moment. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, and now, as the final act played out, Poirot was prepared to expose everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "We are gathered here today not only to seek justice, but to face the consequences of what has been done in the name of love, betrayal, and vengeance." The room was still, save for the distant sound of the wind howling outside. Caroline stood stiffly, her eyes wide, as if waiting for Poirot to reveal the impossible. Elsa seemed to shrink back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes darting nervously. Philip Blake stood with his arms crossed. Jaw clenched. He was a man of deep secrets, but would they remain hidden much longer? Poirot paused, scanning the room, letting the weight of the moment hang heavily in the air. He turned to face Caroline first. "Mademoiselle Crail, you have borne the brunt of suspicion long enough. You were the one who loved your husband, the one who was wronged, yet it is not you who is guilty. The real murderer. It was someone much closer than you could have ever imagined." Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Her voice was barely a whisper, barely holding together. Poirot's eyes locked onto Philip, who stood motionless in the corner. "Monsieur Blake, I have come to understand that you have been hiding in plain sight, playing the role of a victim when in reality you were the mastermind." Gasps filled the room, but Poirot wasn't finished. "You wanted Caroline. You had always wanted her, but she chose Amias. And in your jealousy, you twisted the truth to suit your desires." Philip's face drained of color. "What are you talking about, Poirot?" His voice was a strained mockery of calm. "You're mad. I have no Poirot interrupted him sharply, his tone unyielding. "Do not play games, monsieur. You were driven by your love for Caroline. Yes, but it was not mere love. It was the hatred of Amias's success, his life, his very existence. You resented him, not just for his relationship with Caroline, but because he represented everything you could never be, adored, accomplished, and above reproach." The room was silent as the truth sank in. Philip's fists clenched, but his eyes flickered toward the floor, unwilling to meet Poirot's gaze. Poirot stepped closer, his voice growing colder. "The letter, the painting, the carefully placed clues, all of it was a deception. You manipulated each of us, creating a web so intricate that even I, Hercule Poirot, was nearly ensnared by it. You framed Caroline to protect yourself. And when the investigation started veering too close to the truth, you nearly silenced me as well." Philip's mask began to crack. His lips trembled, and his eyes darted around the room, as if seeking an escape. "I had no choice. I couldn't let her go. I couldn't." His voice trailed off into a hollow, broken whisper. Poirot gave him a long, piercing look. "You see, monsieur, that is the essence of your crime. You believed you had no choice, but the truth is, you were driven by your own twisted sense of justice, your own distorted version of what you deserved." Philip opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He stood there, his body trembling with the weight of his guilt, as if the very walls of the mansion were closing in on him. Poirot turned his attention back to Caroline, his voice softening just a touch. "Mademoiselle, you have been wronged by the man who once called himself your friend. And while you were trapped in a web of lies, he was free to manipulate you, to use your love for Amias as his own justification for murder." Caroline's face crumpled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I never knew. I never imagined it would be Philip." Poirot nodded solemnly. "You never could have known. The man who wears the mask of a friend, who shares in your grief, can often be the one who holds the knife behind your back. Elsa was trembling now, her breath shallow. But why? Why didn't you just leave? Her voice broke with emotion. Philip's eyes flashed with something darker. I couldn't let anyone stand in my way. Not Amyas, and certainly not Caroline. She was mine, and I would do anything to keep her. A long silence followed. The storm outside raged against the windows, as if mirroring the tempest within the room. Poirot remained calm, his demeanor unwavering, even as the storm of emotions swirled around him. His gaze flickered to Miss Violet Marsh, who had been strangely quiet throughout the entire confrontation. But it was the last part of Poirot's revelation that struck the final blow. The painting you tried to hide, Monsieur Blake. It was never meant to be a clue. It was a symbol of your desire to erase Amyas's legacy, to make sure no one would remember the truth. But you failed. As Poirot's words echoed through the room, it was clear that the revelations were far from over. The truth had been exposed, but it had come at a cost. The Crail family was forever scarred, their name irrevocably stained by betrayal and murder. Caroline, though innocent, would carry the burden of this tragedy for the rest of her life. Just as the room began to settle, a final, chilling detail was revealed. Poirot's voice, now tinged with something more somber, came again. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is sometimes a burden no one can bear. But the real question is, who will carry it? As the room fell into an eerie silence, the door to the study creaked open once more, and footsteps echoed from the hall. Cliffhanger ending. A figure stepped into the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. The last face Poirot had ever expected to see. Miss Violet Marsh, the maid. Her face was unreadable, a cold smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I see you've uncovered the truth, Poirot," she said softly, her voice like ice. "But have you really? Or is there more that even you don't understand?" The room fell into a frozen silence, every eye turning toward Violet as she took a slow step forward. What was she hiding? Was she involved in something far darker than anyone had realized? "Philip Blake, it was your jealousy that killed Amyas."